Hey guys, welcome back. There's something I want to test out on this channel. Over this past year, I experimented with a lot of different topics, starting with my flagship series Why No One Plays, to champion group discussions like MeadowEdits champions or shapeshifters, to mechanics discussions like stealth and untargetability, to the occasional one-off discussion like off-meta or one-tricking, and so far, apart from Why Everyone Plays, I don't think I ever came across a video series that was an abject failure. So I wanted to say I really appreciate you guys for watching me no matter what kind of videos I make. Now, about a month ago, I made a community post where I said I was thinking about making a theory crafting video on how I would rework Ryze, a champion whose entire identity is based on how often he gets changed. And to my surprise, the reception was beyond what I expected. I didn't think so many of you would be interested in that kind of stuff. So I guess I should deliver on that by making a video on the rework idea I came up with for Ryze. And depending on how well this does, we might try out other champions like Malphite, Cho'Gath, Nocturne and such. Actually, speaking of Nocturne, I came up with an idea to turn him into a support champion, believe it or not. Oh, and I'm gonna post this on Reddit, so to all the Ryze mains coming over to watch, welcome, hope you enjoy some fun theory crafting. But first, a word from our sponsor, Senpai. Senpai is a companion app that allows you a wide variety of tips and suggestions pre-game to help increase your chances of winning them. During Champ Select, the AI analyzes your team members and gives tags based on their previous performances. Do they have bad vision? Are they aggressive early on? Do they die a lot? Are they passive? You also get a breakdown of the statistics with champions and roles, so if you see someone locking in a champ they have a 10% win rate on, you might want to dodge. Also, as the enemy draft starts to show, the program adaptively suggests the best counterpick options, which also includes a function to import builds into your game based on what pro players take. That way you don't have to scramble to figure out what runes or items to pick. And while the game is loading, you can see your enemy's tags just like how you can see your own team's tags. At the end of the game, Senpai then shows you your own set of tags to tell you what you need to improve on. If you did a lousy job warding, or if you were playing too defensively, things like that. There's two other cool features on the app, starting with a tier list. Everyone references tier lists these days, especially in competitive games, so having one on deck saves you the trouble of once again alt-tabbing. But the cool thing is they have their own rewards section, so by completing challenges and simply playing the game, you can cash in points for gift cards or even computers. Usually for that, you would have to download a separate app, but with Senpai, it's all in one package. If you're interested in checking it out, go to the link on screen or down in the description below. It would really help the channel out a bunch. Thanks again to Senpai for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get into Ryze's 47th rework. A lot has been said about Ryze and his reworks over the years. Documentaries, compilations, memes, yet despite how much of the limelight he's gotten over the years, Ryze has been forgotten as a champion. In fact, I'd be willing to bet money Riot gave up on him and just accepted he's always going to be a balanced nightmare. Having talked about him several times myself, I've always entertained the notion of making my own rework for him, one that could potentially help reach a middle ground between his performance in pro play and solo queue. And I drew a blank for a while. Given the design constraints imposed on League of Legends, making a champion who's effectively a magic damage ADC hypercarry is quite difficult without pushing the envelope on what is allowed and what isn't. Out of the three mage subclasses, battle mages are faced with a challenging problem that sets them apart from their sister classes Artillery and Burst. Among the current 11, I made a Why No One Plays episode on over half. That's because the concept of a high DPS mage goes against the fundamental design boundaries of the mage class in League of Legends, thus leading to a scenario where they're either incredibly overpowered or completely irrelevant. Ryze exemplifies this to the furthest degree. He's received a combination of 6 reworks and gameplay adjustments, more than double that of any other champion, and even to this day, he has never been able to see above a 50% win rate, usually hovering around the mid-40s. Though he's gone through several iterations with their own gimmicks and quirks, the overall feel of Ryze has remained unchanged, a mid-range stability power caster who specializes in dealing heavy AoE magic damage in quick succession, kind of like how a marksman's goal is to have high physical DPS. Creating a mage with that playstyle can be difficult in League of Legends because attack damage and ability power are not the same. One can apply to auto attacks while the other cannot. Furthermore, abilities are gated by cooldowns to offset their higher base numbers in the early to mid game before physical attackers get their hands on crit chance or on hit effects. Giving an AP champion a no cooldown ability poses a lot of risks. We would want to balance it in a way so as to not be too powerful or accessible in the early game, yet still manage to maintain an upward curve as the game goes on. If you're still confused, here's another way to explain it. Why are marksmen so much weaker in the early game compared to fighters and assassins? Their primary source of damage is through auto attacks, and auto attacks have no base numbers to inflate their effectiveness. A basic attack is an instance of damage equal to 100% of your total AD. Naturally, it won't do anywhere near the same damage as an ability, and marksmen generally don't have low cooldown abilities with decent base damage. But auto attacks scale through more than just attack damage. They get stronger through attack speed, crit chance, and on-hit effects. As a result, while most abilities get stronger linearly, your auto attacks get stronger exponentially. As I said before, Ryze is for all intents and purposes a magic damage AD carry, but since he's a mage, his DPS tool will come in the form of abilities, not auto attacks. Consequently, one of his basic abilities has to effectively serve that purpose. This concept has been explored in other champions. Karthus has Lay Waste, a blast of magic damage in a small area that doubles when it hits only one target. It has a cast time of 1/4 of a second and the animation takes 3/4, meaning by the time one Lay Waste is done, the next one will be ready to go. Cassiopeia's Twin Fang is a single target projectile on a very short cooldown that deals bonus damage to poison enemies while healing her for a portion of her ability power. Unlike Ryze, Karthus and Cassiopeia have relatively solid performance despite both having spammable abilities, so where did it go wrong for him? Well, do you notice anything about Karthus and Cassio? Neither of their DPS abilities are the main draw of their respective playstyles. Most of Karthus' pressure is in Requiem and Defile. Lay Waste is simply there to give him a tool in the neutral game. As for Cassio, she plays more of a hit and run and control playstyle. Her important abilities are Miasma and Petrifying Gaze, both of which inhibit her target's movements in combat. Mind you, they have series DPS, but their main priority is to gain control of the battlefield, something battle mages do very well. Anivia with their Glacial Storm, Asol's passive, Rumble's Equalizer, Victor's Gravity Field and Chaos Storm, Talia's Unraveled Earth. Battle mages have DPS, but their focus is control. That's what makes them mages. Ryze, on the other hand, is a magic damage AD carry. While his peers have a side hustle going on, Ryze doubles down on pure damage. Each of his abilities scale off of both ability power and mana, much like how auto attacks on marksmen get stronger through attack damage and crit chance. Then, as the game progresses and he gets his hands on more cooldown reduction, his Q resets more frequently, thus increasing his attack speed, quote unquote, and then he's able to inflict this kind of damage on multiple targets at once, in a similar fashion to Jinx with her Fishbones and Runon's Hurricane. With all this in mind, why is he so valuable in pro play but so weak in solo queue? By extension, why does he feel so much more helpless when behind, but far more oppressive when he's ahead than AD carries? That's because he's the only mage in the game with the privileges of a marksman and a mage. As such, he has the shared weaknesses of both classes. Most mages have a weak early game due to not having a lot of ability power, mana, and cooldown reduction. Most marksmen have a weak early game due to not having a lot of crit chance and attack speed. Ryze's attack speed is represented by Overload's cooldown reset whenever he uses Rune Prison or Spell Flux, and in the past, Arcane Mastery affected all of his abilities. As for his crit damage, that's in the form of Overload's damage amp from hitting a target with Spell Flux. He's by far one of the weakest champions in all of League of Legends in the early game, much weaker than even a marksman, but he also is, to this day, one of the strongest champions in all of League of Legends in the late game. This man can do so much AoE damage in rapid succession that if you don't focus him down quickly, he will destroy everyone. Thing is, it was far too difficult to survive its insanely weak early game that it was rare for anyone to even get to that point. You need impeccable resource management, wave management, and laning fundamentals just to survive. But if you did, no one could stop Ryze. A point-and-click root, a big-ass shield, if you strung together his combos correctly, no one could stop in 1v1. This was true for all iterations of Ryze except the current version. The changes to Spellflux and the removal of his shield was met with a lot of backlash because Ryze mains weren't too happy with how they were raising his skill floor at the cost of lowering his skill ceiling. Now that I'm done with the exposition, we know what to look out for. Ryze is too extreme of a champion. He swings too far in one direction or the other. We want to retain the notion that he's an AP marksman without turning him into a face roll button masher like he was before Season 6. At the same time, we don't want to trivialize his learning curve either. So with that in mind, here's what I propose. I want to drive home his spell weaving theme by incorporating something similar to Final Fantasy's chain system. The mechanic works differently from game to game, but the general idea is that the more attacks you successively dish out, the more damage each of them will do. The one in particular I want to talk about is from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. When a character uses an ability or a normal attack, they strike multiple times. To increase the chain count, no unit can hit an enemy twice in a row, they have to alternate attacks, so you can think of it like 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 sort of deal. As the chain count grows, the opponent takes more damage, so your goal is to rack up as big a chain as possible to maximize your damage. There's already an element of that in his kit with Overload, where if you use Q while having 2 runes stored, you get a burst of movement speed. By the way, I'm not going to consider balance too much since I don't think this will ever happen anyway. First thing is I'm adding a new component to his passive where upon casting a unique ability, that is not using the same one twice in a row, he gains a stack, we'll call it Arcane for lack of a better term, up to a cap of 10, which increases to 20, 30, and then 40 per point in his ultimate. Arcane stacks last for 5 seconds and decay by 1 every second with the duration refreshing on each cast. And speaking of his ultimate, let's be honest, Realm Warp is only ever going to be consistently used in pro play and is more or less a dead ability outside of the bonus damage on Q. I'm not saying it doesn't have its uses, but compared to Desperate Power, it's a downgrade in combat capability. Anyways, we're gonna actually bring back Desperate Power, but instead of giving him free cooldown reduction, spell vamp, and splash damage, here's the new effect. First, it's available at level 1, just like Jace, Nidalee, and Elise, but you can put points into it like how you can with Elise or Nidalee. On cast, Ryze instantly gains 10 stacks of Arcane and empowers all of his basic abilities until it's either turned off or all stacks are consumed. While the buff is in effect, each ability cast consumes 10 stacks and grants him bonus movement speed for 2 seconds equal to the number of stacks he had before activation turned into a percentage. So at 40 stacks, he gets 40% movement speed. If he has 22, he gets 22%. I think Overload will be changed the most. First, I want to compress Spellflux's bonus damage from 10 to 100 to 40 to 70, that way his early game damage isn't too weak. Second, instead of Overload splashing on targets through Spellflux, it will explode if it kills the target and deal damage to nearby enemies. Reason I want to do it like this is because I know that one of Ryze's strongest traits is Wave Clear, but the current version of Ryze just spams EQ over and over again. I'll explain that later when we get to the Spellflux changes. The empowered version will fire a massive blast that travels faster and farther, exploding on contact and dealing additional damage based on the target's missing health. If it's used on a target with Spellflux attached to it, they will suffer 20 to 30% reduced magic resist, and if there are other enemies nearby with Spellflux, they will also take the bonus damage and lower magic resist. Rune Prism will no longer have a root by itself, instead casting it on a target with Spellflux will slow them for 60% for 2 seconds. Empowered Rune Prism will have 2 effects, one on a normal target and one on Spellflux. We're gonna bring back the 2-second root since it's not as easily accessible anymore, but if Ryze casts it on a target with Spellflux, it will root every other target nearby with Spellflux for 1 second. So with this, Ryze has a way of rooting several targets at once. Now you might be thinking I gave some pretty ridiculous buffs to his kit and are gonna ask how is this not gonna break the champion. I thought of that. Spellflux at base will now only hit 1 target at a time no matter what. That way you can't just throw a Spellflux on the entire enemy team then pop your ult and immediately get a 5-man root like that. It's also why I added the explosion property on base overload so his wave clear will still be good even without the splash. Empowered Flux will have the splash instead. As you can kind of guess, I like the old Ryze's playstyle a bit better, where tactical usage of your abilities could effectively give him 0 cooldowns on his Q, W, and E. But I didn't want to turn him back into a face roller, so I didn't give him explicit cooldown reduction. I also think his neutral game is way too strong for how brainless it is. Just mash EQ, 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 and you push the wave while harassing your lane opponent. So I put a cost on Spellflux's spread. Now, a core part of Ryze's self-peel is the EQ combo, so I didn't want to remove that entirely, which is why I made it so his new ultimate gave him a free 10 stacks on activation in case he was engaged on and needed to hold someone in place. In theory, this would maintain the strength of his normal gameplay while making him feel better to play during trades or all-ins. I know these conceptual changes look like they'll make Ryze a lot harder to play, but at the same time, they make his early game much more lenient if you get the hang of his abilities. One thing about him that turns off a lot of players is how unforgiving his laning phase is, but if we were to make his laning phase stronger, his late game has to be nerfed in compensation. Ryze won't be able to clear entire teams with a few EQ combos anymore since he can't get the super spread damage without arcane stacks. Of course, at 40 stacks he can do EQ twice, but that will consume all of his ammo. And what are the odds Ryze will have at least 30 stacks before a fight starts? A skirmish or teamfight can break out at any moment, which is why he gets 10 free stacks on cast, so he has at least 1 empowered ability on deck. Plus, none of those changes remove any of his weaknesses, they just move his power budget around in a way that makes him less extreme, or so I hope. That's how I envision Ryze to be, a combo mage. After watching a lot of footage of his older versions and comparing it to now, what I think he lacked was an actual incentive to combo correctly. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you know that one of my favorite mechanics in League is the empowered ability system. Renekton, Pantheon, Rengar, Vex, Annie, champions that have rather unremarkable abilities at base, but empowered versions of each ability that all cover different functions. Even though they reuse the system a lot, I don't think it gets old since the onus is on the player to learn which empowered ability is good at what time. It's certainly more skill expressive than the mountain of 3-hit passes in the game. Just remember, all of this is in theory. I'm not sure how well it applies in practice. For all I know, this will change nothing and just be another failed version. You know what, at this point I doubt we can even pull off a successful rework on this godforsaken champion. But hey, at the very least it was fun thinking of one. In all honesty though, I don't exactly mind the current version. Yeah, there's no shortages of problems, but he isn't exactly a toxic champion or a badly designed one. Contrary to his win rate, I think he's a very fun champion to play and very rewarding to master. There are some matchups in the top lane where you can sort of turn your brain off and win by default. Teemo, Mordekaiser, Kennen, Nasus, Quinn. He's actually not half bad against those cheesy ranged top laners or stat checkers. Basically, anyone who isn't a skirmisher or a diver he doesn't do half bad against. What do you guys think? Does my rework idea sound good or bad? Or if any of you came up with a rework idea of your own, let me know in the comments. I think we'll end it off here though, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to watch more content like this. Don't forget to check out my Facebook page if you want to see some more lighthearted content. Aside from that, feel free to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord server, and check out my Rework retrospective series, which is what inspired me to make this video. But until next time, thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.